Thanks for tuning in to the MoveMind Podcast. This episode, we're going further down the strength and conditioning for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu wormhole. Specifically, what should you be doing in your strength and conditioning sessions? We've talked a lot in the last couple of episodes about the principles and why we're doing what we're doing and the importance of doing S&C for BJJ. But now today, let's look a little bit exactly what are we going to do in the training sessions. What are you going to do in the weight room? Because it's all very well knowing the principles and stuff, but what are you actually going to do to make it happen? You've stopped asking the wrong questions, calisthenics versus weights, kettlebells versus barbells, etc. You've realized that they're just tools in the toolbox, and you figured out your maintenance volumes, so how many jiu-jitsu sessions you can complete in a week and not regress, how many weight training sessions you can complete and not regress to. Don't worry if you haven't figured exactly that, because you kind of need to know what you're going to do in the weight training sessions to know if you can regress or not. But anyway, just keep that idea in mind, especially if you do have a training history of a year or more. And then you've also been thinking about your maximum recoverable volume. So what's the maximum number of jiu-jitsu sessions you can do in a week and not overshoot, not overcook yourself. And the same with lifting. What's the maximum number of lifting sessions you can do in a week and still not overtrain? Now that you've got those figures in mind, you should have a bit better idea of what we're going to talk about now in this episode. It should make a little bit more sense. So a couple of questions on top of that is to ask yourself, are you competing soon? Because if you are competing soon in grappling, you're going to want to think about your strength and conditioning sessions in terms of a phasic structure. So completing phases, usually 3 to 4 weeks per phase, and then the topic of the phase or the focus of the phase changes, and you want to think about going through the phases until you compete, so that you're in peak performance for when you're about to compete. And if you're not competing soon, then just think about really what you're trying to achieve as a general quality of fitness across all the fitness qualities or variations of fitness whilst you're in the weight room. So just keeping that general physical preparedness up to scratch. So strength and conditioning department, how strong do you need to be? And what is the main objective of being in the weight room? Okay, these are important questions. How strong do you need to be for jiu-jitsu? To be honest, I'm going to quote Chad Wesley Smith here because he does a better job, but let's see what he has to say and then talk about it a little bit. You can get strong enough with more sub-maximal work done with great intent, paired with explosive work, isometric training, and higher reps for strength endurance that will also support hypertrophy. Okay, so that's strong enough. Basically, sub-maximal work done with some other form of strength training on the side. You don't have to be world's strongest man, world level powerlifter to be competing in grappling. Sub-max strength training is strong enough by the standards of jiu-jitsu at least. And then the main objective of being in the weight room, it's to produce force, to produce more force, to learn how to produce force. That's our main goal, especially when it comes to the strength side of things. Conditioning side of things, our goal is to trigger the energy system we're trying to develop and then take time off so we can recover and then come back again and push it a bit harder, but that's more energy systems focused per se. But strength is all about force production. That's what we're trying to do, is increase the force, okay? So based on that front, how do we go about it? Okay, how do we go about learning how to produce more force? Essentially, we need two things, really simple. You need a strength training or a strength and conditioning program, okay? And then the second thing is that program needs to be made up of exercises, okay? Decent exercise selection, exercises that are going to help you, not waste your time, okay? So the program, what is the program all about? You hear people all the time, I've got a program for sale, buy my program. What program do you follow? Well, what is it? What do we need? We need a program specifically that offers a structure dedicated towards improving the qualities needed for the sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or grappling, whatever your grappling sport is. And we'd have figured out what those needs were by conducting the needs analysis in the last episode, which if you listen to, you would have realised there's a lot of needs actually for the grappler, for the BJJ player. There's a lot of needs that we need to tick off. Okay, so the programming is important. The program is directed at improving those qualities. It's not arbitrary and it's not random, for sure. Okay, so you can compete often in jiu-jitsu depending on where you live, and for other people you might not be able to compete that often because you live further away. Regardless, you'll probably find that out of your 365-day year, most of that year you're not actually competing. You'll probably compete 1 to 10 times a year on average, but most of the year is spent training. So regardless of whether you are competing or you're not competing, most of your work done in the weight room will be GPP, general physical preparedness work. Okay, so just bear that in mind. And as we talked about, but just briefly running through the needs again without going into detail this time, but this is what the program will include with regards to developing certain qualities. Okay, so in the strength department, we'll be looking at maximal strength, okay, also known as limit strength, which is basically made up of 3 kinds: eccentric, usually the downward phase of the lift; the static strength or isometric, the paused motion or the space between the negative; and then the upwards or the concentric portion. Okay, so back squat, the bar goes down, eccentric. There's a split second where there's isometric component where the bar is static, and then as you change direction, you come up into the concentric. Okay. To summarize the limit strength or max strength from Grapple Strong by Josh Bryant, limit strength is basically how much force can you produce in one effort. It is your athletic foundation, which is key to remember. Only powerlifters actually need to maximize their limit strength for competition, because it's a strength sport. And the primary lifts, the big lifts, multi-joint lifts, are the main way that you're going to develop and build your max strength or your limit strength. Okay, so a big part of your training is going to be max strength work. Okay. Another big part of the strength work will be sub-max and sort of relative strength work. Okay, as I just mentioned with that quote from Chad Wesley Smith, you can get strong enough from just doing sub-max strength work. Yeah, sub-max being basically below 90% of your 1 rep max. Explosive strength, another form; isometric strength, strength endurance. Okay, so those are the strength needs. Conditioning or energy systems: aerobic capacity, alactic power, alactic capacity, lactic capacity. We talked a lot about that last episode. And then flexibility, mobility, stability. Okay, so the program is going to incorporate those things into it, depending on, you as a hobbyist, you as an athlete, you as a semi-professional, whatever it is, you as a professional athlete. The program will have those needs taken into account. Okay, so phasic structure basically for the ones that are competing, and then mostly GPP work for those that are not. Now for the fun bit, and I want to keep these episodes around the 20-25 minute mark, because I've discovered that's how we keep your attention for the most, and it's the same for me when I'm listening to other people ramble on about stuff. So let's get into the exercise selection. I love this shit. This is probably the most exciting part for me, is out of the millions of exercises that exist in the world, what ones are going to be the sort of the best bang for your buck in the weight room that you should focus your time on. So strength exercises, okay? We're going to categorize these in the squat category, the hinge category, the push, the pull, and then from there, pretty much carrying, twisting, crawling. Those are kind of the add-on categories. So main categories. Squat then, what squat variations? One of the big ones, this is in no particular order, they're all pretty good, but safety bar, the safety bar squat, okay? Safety bar you've probably seen before. It's a padded bar that sits over your shoulders with your hands in front, okay? But the bar resting on the back of your upper shoulder girdle. It's probably the most comfortable bar to use. The handles at the front take out any shoulder mobility issues, or if you've got any injuries from training, so it can be handy to have the handles up front. And the position of the bar, the way it's set around your shoulder girdle, allows you for a super upright torso position. So safety bar, definitely worth implementing into your programming. Front squat, classic front squat, targets the quads the most and challenges your torso stability because of the load being directly above your abdomen there on the front of your body. And it also employs quite a lot of upper back strength in the traps and the various trap muscles, because you've got to keep your elbows high to create that shelf for the bar to sit on. So big fan of the front squat. Bulgarian split squat, you've probably come across the dirty Bulgarian split squat, the absolute glute destroyer. It is the most effective unilateral or single leg variation for glute hypertrophy. It's, as anyone that's done them knows, how sore your butt gets when you do Bulgarian split squat. The split stance is obviously important for grapplers. Yeah, most of your work done on the feet is done in a square or a split stance. And it has a very low central nervous system fatigue compared to, say, the back squat. And you can do Bulgarian split squat with dumbbells and barbells, sandbags, etc., a variety of tools. So it's really good for the single leg variations on squatting. It does have much less carryover, so although you might get sore if you do kind of quite intense versions of it, your nervous system will still be pretty fresh compared to something like a heavy back squat. So I would say the Bulgarian split squat is probably the leader of the single leg squat variations. Back squat, my favorite. I'm biased, but I love it. King of the overloaded squat variations. It's the most fun, I think. You can, chuck the most weight on the back squat because of the way the mechanical advantages work. It's great fun, great pattern to build, and just anyone that squats heavy knows what I'm talking about. The Zercher squat, it has the most counterbalance of all the squat variations because you're loaded at the front of your body with the weight fairly close to the hips, and because of that it's really easy to sit back and sit deep into the squat. It has the highest glute recruitment in terms of all the squat variations with 2 legs, and it forces tension in the upper body. Okay, it forces tension in the arms, which I think is super important for grapplers. The Zercher grip is fantastic. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world, but employing the upper body into a squat pattern, I think, is magic for the grappling community. Box squat, massive fan of box squats. It takes less recovery time, again, lower CNS demand than a regular squat, so you can recover faster. It's really easy to learn, it's safe, and I use it often with beginner lifters as a coaching tool to educate how to squat to depth and to build confidence in sitting back in the pattern, stuff like that. So big fan of the box squat. And then finally, belt squat. Belt squats are great because there's no direct spinal load, and it's really good for injured grapplers, especially if you're harboring an upper body injury, elbow, wrist, shoulder, something like that. The mass is now below you, attached to the belt, so it gives a different stimulus to then having the back on top of your spine or on your shoulders. So yeah, super versatile and is used a lot, especially on the rehab journey coming back to sporting performance, but also as a good variation and to take time off of some of the more axial loaded or spinal loaded patterns and the other squat variations. So super quick rundown there on squats. I'd really only bother with those, to be honest with you. There's hundreds of other squat variations, but I don't see them carrying over nearly as effectively to your S&C and your grappling performance as those that I just mentioned. Next category then, hinge. So the hinge pattern, of which the deadlift is in the hinging family. Which exercises are the best bang for your buck for hinging? So again, no particular order. Trap bar deadlifts, big fan of the trap bar. Yeah, hexagonal shaped bar or octagonal shaped bar that allows you to bend your knees basically a lot more than a straight bar. Beautiful invention, very safe for beginners. The pattern is more like a squat than a deadlift because of the knee bend. If you're doing a knee bended, trap bar deadlift, or what people consider just be the trap bar deadlift, you can do Romanian style, stiff leg style with it too, but it allows for the knee bend. So often I'll load beginners heavily on a trap bar instead of a straight bar because the technicalities are removed and it's far less technical than a straight bar deadlift. So a massive fan of the trap bar, really safe to load heavy and get a good strength stimulus in the squat pattern, hinge pattern. It comes under the hinge category, but it's a bit more like a squat. Hip thrusts. you can load the hip thrust with the straight barbell very, very heavy indeed. Again, it's safe in the way that you're supported. Entering and exiting the exercise position is safe. They train hip extension, but on another plane. So it's still a hinge category, but you're just training it on the vertical plane instead. And as you'll know from bridging-based escapes in grappling, they are also on that vertical plane. Very often you're on your back on the floor and you have to bridge in some sort of fashion to start your escape or defensive cycle. So there is a carryover there almost directly into how we use the hinging mechanics when lying on our back, even though the hinge has a slightly different or slightly more simplified than perhaps the wrestler's bridge. But regardless, both employ hip extension, and big fan of hip thrusts. Snatch grip deadlift. Okay, so snatch grip obviously taken from Olympic weightlifting. It's a wider grip on the bar, which means it's a greater challenge for your grip strength. The posterior chain does have to work harder because the leverages are different now. Your hips are at a different starting position to the regular deadlift. In fact, in a snatch grip deadlift, your hips are even lower than they would be for a regular conventional deadlift, so your posterior chain has to work harder. Great for grapplers. Harder posterior chain, harder grip. That's brilliant. The Zercher lift, I've been playing around recently. Love it. It's a combination of the Zercher squat and the Zercher deadlift, kind of. You deadlift conventionally, albeit with a slightly wider grip just past the knees. Once the bar's past your knees, you rest it on your knees, you squat, and then you Zercher it up to a standing position. And then from there, you're able to drop the bar if you're able to, or you can reverse it back down to the floor, going Zercher to the knees and then deadlifting it down. It's a fantastic lift. It's a long duration lift. Each rep takes anywhere from sort of 20 to 30 seconds. So you're recruiting massive amounts of global tension, head to toe tension per repetition. Again, crosses over for grappling massively. Yeah, head to toe tension, often for 20, 30 second bursts at a time. So a big fan of the Zercher lift. A little bit more technical perhaps to coach, but still actually very comfortable. And I think it's got a lot of mileage. And then you've got the Romanian deadlift. So the RDL, so stiff-legged deadlift. I'm a fan of doing slightly higher reps, you know, the sort of 8 to 12 range with these with straps. Again, it's massive for posterior chain development. The hamstrings are targeted more because there is less knee bend. The straps help because, you know, you're getting enough grip stimulus most of the time just from your training in general. So you can take grip fatigue out of the equation by using straps. And then obviously you get less CNS fatigue from a straight leg deadlift than you do from a conventional deadlift because of the way the leverages are altered from having straighter legs. So a big fan of Romanian deadlift. And then I guess finally the king of the deadlifts, the conventional straight bar deadlift. Has a high CNS demand if you load it really heavy, but for sub-max work it can be really effective. It's technical to learn, but it's an important lift to learn, and arguably it's not too dissimilar from real world applications. And in the grappling sense, again, strengthens posterior chain, and lifting bodies from a dead start or from an inert position is pretty common in grappling. When someone is defending and turning themselves into a sandbag, dead weight like structure, lifting them from an inert position it comes up all the time, especially on offense. So conventional, load it wisely, train it wisely, but it has its place for sure for grappling in the hinge department. So that's squat and hinge done. I wouldn't really bother with any other hinge variations, to be honest, for now. The good mornings, Zercher good mornings for sure. The Zercher grip good mornings, they have their place too. But beyond that, I haven't really seen too much efficacy elsewhere for the thousands of hinge variations that exist. Those are like your bread and butter ingredients, if you like. Pushing then, so I guess pushing split into horizontal pushing, vertical pushing. Okay, so horizontal pushing, basically variations on the bench press. Okay, people shit on the bench press for sporting performance often in the S&C world. For grappling, I think it's absolutely valid. Horizontal pushing is key. The bench press variations, they allow for the highest level of overload in that position on the horizontal push. It's a vector that we constantly use in grappling, pushing horizontally. Arguably, grappling is more of a pull sport, especially in the gi, but we do push horizontally a lot too. So why not be strong there? Okay. Again, producing force is our main goal in the strength department in the weight room. The bench press variations, especially on a barbell, allow for that overload to happen so that we can produce a lot of force there. Again, you've got to be careful, it should be coached properly. There are newer specialty bars that exist to take kind of shoulder mobility restrictions and stuff out of the equation, but straight bar, it's good to learn, and it's amazing just how strong you can get from that as a horizontal push. That's pretty much all I've got for the horizontal pushes in terms of bang for your buck, just variations on the bench press position, okay? Whether you're slightly changing the angle of the bench press with regards to the bench, incline, decline, or whether you're changing the depth of how far you push the bar, board presses, stuff like that. That's the king, really, bench press variations. Vertical pushing then, my favorite, overhead press, allows for super high levels of overload overhead. And as you know, in grappling, elbows get placed overhead all the time. So again, why not be strong there? Overhead press allows for the greatest level of overload, variations of it, barbell, kettlebell, dumbbell, etc. It's important to be able to access that vertical vector, in my opinion, for grappling. Another lift which is cool is a Z press, so basically a seated overhead press on the floor. The mechanical advantage is now reduced, so you have to work harder, but it means that there are lighter weights involved, and again, much less CNS fatigue than a regular overhead press. Push press. Arguably, push press you can load the highest because now you're using your legs to drive momentum and break the inertia of the bar. It's great for training power, probably one of my favorite techniques for training power. It teaches that explosive coordination. It's not super technical to teach. It does have, a little bit of technique to it, but it's also quite intuitive. Very often when people are, coming to a failure point in their strict press, they will be dipping and driving naturally to get the bar above their head, which they're already kind of push pressing at that point. So big fan of the push press. And then lastly, bang for your buck for the vertical vector for pushing, the landmine single arm press. So if you struggle with overhead mobility due to past shoulder injuries or wrist and elbow troubles, very often pushing on the 45-degree vector off the shoulder with a landmine can really help. And again, you can really overload that and still get a good strength stimulus on that 45-degree angle. So that is the pushing ticked off. Pulling, again, we can split the pulling into horizontal and vertical. Some of my favorite variations on the pull, the barbell row, and then single arm dumbbell rows too. Massive part of grappling, pull sport for the most part. Hinged and pulling, common positions to find yourself in matches. You can overload the barbell row massively. It builds great levels of back strength and requires a lot of tension to get the job done. So big fan of barbell rows. Seated rows, I do like the seated rows from time to time. They do have a much lower CNS demand. It doesn't take long to recover from them. They're safe. They're usually really safe to perform. They don't take much coaching at all. And there's obviously tons of grips and attachments that you can use for varied stimuli as well. And again, it's a common position in grappling. Anyone that plays butterfly guard will understand that. The pendlay row, massive fan of the pendlay row, arguably one of the better power building exercises for grapplers. Again, teaches that explosive coordination, pulling off of the floor, breaking inertia, using power, trying to accelerate that bar as fast as you can. And then the inverted row, arguably great for strength endurance, feet on the floor hanging under the bar or barbell set in the rack. And doing chest to bar underneath for the inverted row. Very good for strength endurance, surprisingly difficult. The vertical pulling department, chin-ups and pull-ups. Okay, great for strength endurance. Obviously the weighted versions allow for higher degrees of overload, so you can still get really strong in that pattern. And it builds grip strength and endurance too, just by the nature of being suspended from the bar. So yeah, big fan of chins and pulls. Muscle ups, arguably a little bit more technical in the beginning, although once you've done it for a while, you realize it really is just technique and coordination. You don't have to be massively strong to do it. But what I like about the muscle up is it does train the false grip. So anyone that's into leg locks will understand the importance of the false grip. And it gives you a pushing and pulling exercise in one. Yeah, it's a tricep dip in there mixed with a sort of a chin up, and it trains, coordination. It's a highly coordinated movement. Although it's not graded in gymnastics and it's just the way you mount onto the rings, it is a cool exercise in the strength world, and providing you understand what you're doing with a bit of coaching and technique, I think it goes a long way. And then we're into the kind of the twist and the carry categories. So as far as twisting goes, really med ball slams and landmine attachment kind of twists are about all you really need. You don't have to go overboard with the twisting. Tons of power-based exercises, conditioning exercises, and strength exercises can be performed with the medicine ball. So pretty simple. And then carrying, big fan of loaded carries for grapplers. Again, carrying a person in the mat return department, kind of important with our sport. Single arm farmers carries, 2-arm farmers carries, sandbag carries, kettlebell, upside down kettlebell carries, partner carries, etc. There's hundreds of variations, but I'm a big fan of just the category of loaded carries in general. You can't really go wrong with good, heavy, loaded carries. So that is a kind of a crash course on the strength department. Those are the best exercises I recommend you put your time into and use them for your programming. There's other exercises that come into the Alactic Capacity department. Once you've built a bit of power in them, then it's time to build the capacity. So you want to be able to link those exercises together. And the best bit of advice that Chad Wesley Smith gives is those exercises that you choose for Alactic Capacity work should be cyclical in nature. You should be able to repeat the exercise back to back to back for reps without having to run over and reset the position or get the piece of equipment that you just threw or whatever. Okay, so just thinking cyclical. So for example, squat jumps, clapping push-ups, clapping pull-ups, medicine ball slams beneath you, clapping pull-ups if you're in the pulling department, scoop throws where the ball's going to land near you, medicine ball's going to land near you, and you can continue. So quite cyclical in nature. And then isometric strength, really some of the best bang for your bucks for the isos is to have the barbell and lock it into the rack and do kind of iso holds with the barbell against the immovable power rack. And you can do that with pushing, and you can do that with hinging and deadlift based patterns. So there's some mileage there. And then really the other kind of department is, I guess, the sandbag, in terms of throwing the sandbag or shouldering the sandbag. Not too dissimilar from the med ball, but it does allow for a bit more overload. You can get super heavy sandbags to almost mimic your own body weight, and shouldering and throwing those around can be great too. So that's really just a crash course on exercise selection. Although that was a quick list, a lot of thought has gone into that, and from referencing other coaches and seeing what they're doing around the world with their grapplers, you start to see time and time again the patterns of which exercises are worth your time and which ones are just a waste. So with that in mind, let's just finish this episode up then with a little bit of sort of programming, if you like, sample programming on how you can implement this exercise selection or these various exercises into a training session that would be worth your time. This is taken from my ebook, free ebook that I'd like to give you guys. Stay tuned for its release date. It's going to be in the next couple of weeks. I've put it together as a kind of synopsis of the last few episodes based around strength and conditioning for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and for grapplers. And in the book, I just go through a lot of the key principles that we talked about in the episodes, and just kind of making a bit of a cheat sheet. It's about 14, 15 pages, just so you guys have a reference piece there to go through. And in that ebook, I've included some sample programming, which I'll share with you now. But obviously, when it's released, feel free to pick up a copy and have a look in greater detail for yourself. So 2 different kind of case studies here. Gi player, blue belt. They're very flexible, but they don't have any training history. Okay, never trained S&C before. The other case study is going to be a no-gi player, purple belt. They're very strong, and they've been training for 2 years, following an S&C program 2-3 days a week for the last couple of years. So let's take a look at the gi player first, because the demands of gi and the demands of no gi are slightly different. Lots of similarities too, but slightly different. So for the gi blue belt player, so for this example, they're going to be in their first phase. They do compete, so phase 1, which is focused around the sub-maximum strength qualities, and alactic power in the conditioning department or the energy systems department. So for day 1, this will be 3 days a week training, 4 weeks at 3 days a week. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training will be more drilling than hard sparring throughout the week, and 4 to 6 days per week of Jiu-Jitsu. Okay, so this blue belt's doing 4 to 6 days per week, mostly drilling, but with hard sparring kind of spliced throughout those 4 to 6 sessions per week. And with the weights, it's 3 days a week. So day 1, warm up, always warm up. There's more in the ebook as to why. And the warm-up's going to consist of mostly dynamic, active flexibility stuff. Okay, so you using your own muscular tension to make your limbs move through space. And isometrics, yeah, so holding positions for brief amounts of time to turn on the muscle contraction. That should get the temperature warm, you know, the body temperature warm, get the tissue prepared, etc., break a little bit of a sweat. Second exercise then is actually the alactic power. Works well to go first here. Box jumps, 5 sets of 3 reps, 3-minute rest between each set of 3. Okay, why do we put the box jump straight after the warm-up? Well, because the dynamic nature of doing the box jump basically coordinates the central nervous system, prepares the central nervous system for more highly coordinated work, what we call priming, primes the nervous system. And that works well because the third exercise on the list for day 1 is the trap bar deadlift. Okay, 4 sets of 4 reps at 60%, 3-minute rest between sets. So the box jump preps the nervous system for the deadlift, and then trap bar deadlift is the kind of main exercise, the main course for that session. And then lastly, number 4, or exercise number 4, stage 4 of the training session, stability circuit. Okay, I mentioned that this gi player, their blue belt, they're very flexible. Okay, no training history, so a stability circuit's going to lend well to finishing their session. The central nervous system demand of the stability exercises is low, so we put that at the end of the training session. 3 exercises, 3 rounds, 20 reps per exercise. Okay, and that can be targeting the shoulders, usually the most unstable, with Gumby grapplers. It could be hips, knees, ankles, wrists, whatever. Okay, so that's day 1. Day 2, warm up again. Section 2, seated box jumps, 5 sets of 3 reps, 3-minute rest between. Paused front squats, 4 sets of 4 reps at 60%. Okay, so front squatting, pausing at the bottom, driving out of the hole with some good intention. 4 sets of 4 reps at 60%, 3-minute rest between sets. And then again, stability circuit to finish. And then day 3, warm up, weighted reactive jumps, 4 sets of 3 reps, 3-minute rest between. Dumbbell floor press, okay, so horizontal push, dumbbell floor press, 4 sets of 8 reps at 65% with 3-minute rest, and then stability circuit again. Okay, so you can see a common theme on this because it's a sub-max strength and alactic power, you know, first phase of 3 for the competitive grappler. The alactic power exercises are jump themed for this sample program here, and they work well to prime the nervous system for the sub-max strength lifts after. Okay, so that's a little sort of sample program for the blue belt gi player there. Very flexible. Now let's go to slightly different then. So no gi player, the purple belt, who's super strong, a little bit stiffer in the joint department. They're very strong and they do have 2 years training history. So for this one, we're going to jump in a bit later in the phasic structure to phase 2. Okay, so phase 2 for the competitive grappler, max strength and alactic capacity are the focuses. Okay, now for this, because of the nature of max strength and alactic capacity, you're actually going to do the max strength after a warm-up first, and then the alactic capacity exercises you're going to do second, simply because the volume is much higher. If you did that alactic capacity work first, there's a good chance you'd be a bit too tired to do the max strength work after. And it's max strength, it's not sub-max. So you do want all your faculties fresh and online for that, that challenge, okay? So day 1 for the purple belt no-gi player, warm up again. This time the warm up for this This player is going to be a little bit more mobility based and jump focused. So again, the jumps are going to prep the nervous system for the heavier work to come. They're already quite strong and a little bit stiff, so the joint mobility stuff is going to help them kind of be able to get into the right positions needed for the heavier work in a moment. Section 2 then of the training session, back squat, king of overload, 3 sets of 4 reps at 75%, 4-minute rest. Okay, so a bit longer rest because we're going into the heavier loads, and then this will be programmed over 4 weeks. This is only day 1 of week 1, but kind of by week 3 we'd be well up into the higher 80% in terms of load, maybe even into the 90s. So back squat section 2. Section 3 then is the Alactic Capacity work. So this is simple, 6 seconds on, 20 seconds off for week 1, with 4 rounds of that per exercise. And you change exercise and rest 2 minutes between the rounds. So for example, med ball slam, 6 seconds on, 20 seconds off, 4 times, and then rest, on we go. Light kettlebell squat jump, same protocol, rest, on we go. Clap pull-ups, rest, and then the next one, clap push-ups. Okay, so that's the Alactic Capacity day 1. Day 2, warm up again, mobility and jumps, mobility and med ball throws also works well, especially for this, as the next section is overhead press. Okay, so 4 sets of 2 reps at 85%, 4-minute rest, and then section 3 is the Alactic Capacity work again, same exercises as day 1. Day 3, it's a warm-up, surprise, surprise, and it's going to be a little bit mellower on the CNS demand. So this is going to be more of the accessories day. So an accessories superset, horizontal pull exercise, 3 sets of 12 reps, and then superset that with a horizontal push exercise, 3 sets of 12 reps, and then a 90-second rest. So much shorter rest on the accessory work. Yeah, CNS demand is lower, the reps are higher. This is mainly for sort of hypertrophy and joint health side of things. Also acts as a little bit of a, not quite recovery, but it's not as intense as the max effort work. So it's taking this kind of high-low approach to the periodization throughout the week, and then finishing that training session, 3rd section, with a hip mobility circuit. Okay, this is a no-gi player who's already a bit tight, strong enough but a bit tight in the joint department. So 3 exercises, 3 rounds, and then 10 reps of each exercise for the hip mobility circuit. Okay, the jiu-jitsu training for this player is heavier sparring days in phase 2, followed by lighter drilling days. Again, the high-low approach, and it's 4 to 5 days per week on the mats for grappling. Okay, so it's 3 days a week in the weight room, 4 to 5 days per week on the mats for phase 2. Okay, for this no-gi player. So that's a little crash course there on week 1 of phase 2 for someone who's already pretty strong and got a bit of training history. So I hope you've enjoyed that. It's a bit of a crash course on what these training sessions should look like for you in the weight room surrounding your jiu-jitsu training. The next episode, I'm going to try and just review a couple of the different programs that exist out there. I'll be announcing the launch of the free ebook for you all to take a look at and see what you think. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you've got any questions, you can DM me on Instagram at MoveMind, or get in touch with me through the website, movemind.online. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I'll catch you next time.